The morning light over London possessed a curious gentleness, as though the sun itself hesitated to intrude upon the world of polished carriages, sweeping gowns, and whispered cruelties. The annual Hawthorne Charity Fete, an event meant to display benevolence, had instead become a theater where reputations were measured more sharply than coin. Beneath the white silk canopy, ladies fluttered like restless swans, their parasols tilting toward one another as though to shield their faces from scandal while eagerly breathing it in. Miss Lillian Marcourt stepped into this world with a composure that belied her trembling heart. Her gown, though impeccably styled by her aunt's clever hands, carried the faintest threadbare sheen, visible only to eyes trained on society's flaws. She knew the whispers would begin the moment she passed the gates, and they did, like the soft hiss of a serpent sliding through grass. Poor girl, the Marcourts are on the brink of ruin. She ought to be grateful anyone still wishes to marry her. Imagine an arranged match with the Duke himself. A desperate grasp at survival. Lillian kept her chin lifted, though the words bruised her like stones beneath silk. Her aunt, Lady Henrietta Marcourt, walked beside her, clutching her arm with a mixture of hope and fear. "Do not heed them, my dear," she murmured, though her voice trembled. "They speak from jealousy, nothing more." Lillian wished she could believe it, but she knew better. London thrived on bloodless cruelty, and she had been marked as prey long before the fete began. At the far edge of the gathering, where servants moved with quiet efficiency, a young footman paused as she passed. His posture was too straight, his restraint too deliberate for ordinary service. He lowered his head as if simply being respectful, yet his gaze, clear, steady, and startlingly perceptive, met hers for the briefest moment. Something within it unsettled her. Not audacity, not admiration. Something gentler, almost protective, as though he had seen the sting of every whisper and silently vowed to stand guard against them. She looked away, cheeks warming. A footman's gaze should not linger so. Yet it did not feel improper. It felt human in a world determined to feel otherwise. Unbeknownst to her, the footman was none other than His Grace Benedict Hawthorne, Duke of Wessington, heir to ancient estates, steward of fortunes, and prisoner to expectations that felt heavier than any crown. His advisers had insisted he arrive in silence, study his intended bride from afar, and determine whether she sought him for status or substance. He had agreed only reluctantly, for the notion of evaluating a woman like a ledger entry pricked something raw within him. And so he stood dressed in livery, half rebellion, half concealment, hidden in plain sight. He had not expected her to be beautiful in a way that quieted noise rather than demanded attention. Nor had he expected the restraint in her eyes, the dignity with which she bore the malice around her. The whispers about her fallen fortune did not match the woman before him. She possessed an inner steadiness that seemed at odds with society's judgment. It was this contradiction that drew him in with disconcerting force. Lord Percival Ashcombe, by contrast, moved through the crowd like a peacock in full plume, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. He spotted Lillian at once, prowling toward her with the confidence of a man long accustomed to admiration he scarcely deserved. "My dear Miss Marcourt," he said, sweeping a bow too ostentatious for propriety. "How radiant you look even in such uncertain circumstances." The pause lingered, intentional and cruel. Lillian felt Lady Henrietta tense beside her. "I thank you for your concern, my lord," she replied, voice gentle yet unwavering. "But uncertainty plagues every household in one form or another. Some merely hide it behind brighter varnish." The footman, Benedict, felt a flicker of astonishment. Her retort had not been sharp enough to invite criticism, yet firm enough to silence him. She wielded diplomacy like a blade she preferred not to draw. Lord Percival's smile faltered. "Still, one wonders whether a certain duke will consider your circumstances agreeable. Men of such rank tend to expect unblemished prospects." A fresh wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lillian inhaled slowly, steadying her voice. "The worth of a match is not measured in coin alone, my lord. Character weighs far more." Her words struck Benedict like a blow he had not braced for. Character. She valued character above fortune, yet she might soon discover her future husband was a man who hid behind disguises to judge her. A flush of shame crept into his chest. Lord Percival inclined his head in mock sympathy before drifting away to spread the venom further. Lady Henrietta exhaled shakily. "You must not let him rattle you, Lillian. Accepting the Duke's proposal could secure our family's future." Lillian pressed her lips together. "I do not wish to be purchased, Aunt. If His Grace seeks only a convenient alliance, he shall find me a poor acquisition." Benedict's hands tightened around the silver tray he carried. She spoke with such sincerity, unguarded, uncalculated. It startled him. He had been prepared to reject her if she proved ambitious or manipulative. He had not prepared to find a woman who feared being used more than she feared losing status. As he stepped forward to offer tea to the cluster of ladies nearest her, she turned toward him again. Her eyes held a softness at odds with the day's unkindness. "You need not bow so deeply," she whispered almost shyly. "It is only I." Only I, spoken as if her presence diminished others' burdens rather than adding to them. "Miss," he murmured, lowering his voice to remain within character, "it is no burden." The exchange lasted only a breath, yet something shifted in both of them, something quiet, fragile, and quietly luminous. Then a new whisper spread, sharper than the rest. "Do you suppose she will be dismissed before the wedding even happens? Would a duke truly bind himself to a ruined family? Perhaps he intends only a brief courtesy before ending the match." Lillian's jaw tightened, but she offered no retort. Instead, she stepped aside, gazing toward a distant fountain where roses drooped under the rising heat. Benedict watched her, struck by how someone so bruised by society could still move with grace untouched by bitterness. For a moment, she stood framed in morning light, lonely, dignified, and unaware that the man she believed a servant saw her with a clarity that unsettled his very convictions. He understood the truth then. He could not meet her as a duke first. He must know the woman behind the poise, the heart behind the wounded silence. A title would obscure both. As she turned to leave the fete, her expression composed yet wounded, Benedict stepped back into the shadow of the servants' pavilion and made the decision that would alter both their lives. He would go to her household not as a nobleman but as a servant, and learn whether the whispers were wrong about her, or whether he was wrong about himself. The Marcourt townhouse on Brookage Lane had once held the soft glow of prosperity, marble floors polished to a mirror shine, chandeliers dressed in crystal, and servants enough to make silence a luxury rather than a symptom. Now, its grandeur lingered only in shadowed corners, as though the walls themselves remembered better days. Lady Henrietta kept the windows immaculate and the curtains freshly brushed, but no amount of tidying could disguise the absence of footmen, the thinning pantry, or the echoing hush in rooms once warmed by music and laughter. Into this fragile household stepped Thomas Gray, the assumed name of Benedict Hawthorne, with the poise of a man walking a tightrope of his own making. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Edna Whitcomb, studied him with sharp suspicion as he stood in the front hall. She was a woman who had seen 30 years of London's hauteur, and the fine lines around her eyes suggested both kindness and an aptitude for discerning pretenders. "You claim experience in service," she said, voice steady. "Yet you hold yourself like one accustomed to command." Benedict inclined his head with humble restraint. "My mother was in service, madam. She insisted I learn every task properly." Mrs. Whitcomb's gaze lingered. "We are not hiring easily these days. But the house is in need." She gave a short nod. "Very well. You may stay." It was less an acceptance than a warning. Any misstep would send him out the door. That evening, Benedict carried a tray of tea into the dimly lit drawing room, where Lillian sat by the window, needlework forgotten on her lap. Candlelight softened the tension in her shoulders, revealing the quiet fatigue she hid so well at public events. A thin mending line ran along one glove, almost invisible but not to him. She stitched them herself. She cared for her belongings with devotion, as though each preserved thread was a small triumph against misfortune. When he set the tea before her, she lifted her eyes with a gentle impact he felt more keenly than he wished. "Thank you, Mr. Gray." The use of his false name unsettled him more than he expected. It felt like a small theft, not of identity but of honesty. "You are welcome, miss," he replied, stepping back. Her gaze lingered just a heartbeat too long, curiosity without impropriety, interest without assumption. He understood then that she was not drawn to status or ornament. She simply noticed people. Over the next days, Benedict learned the quiet rhythms of the household. Lady Henrietta's anxious pacing as she composed letters to creditors, Mrs. Whitcomb's habit of humming hymns as she polished silver worn thin with age, Lillian's early morning walks through the garden, tending flowers no one else had time to rescue. She held conversations with wilting roses as though speaking life into them. He found himself watching her more than he intended. Her manner of offering comfort to her aunt, her composure when reading yet another politely phrased rejection of their debts, her laughter, rare but sincere, when the household cat refused obedience. She was a woman who bore disappointment with dignity, and still dared to hope. One chilly evening after she retired to her writing desk, he noticed her remove her gloves with delicate care. She rubbed the fabric between her fingers, wearing thin, fighting to endure. Something in that small gesture stirred him deeply. She deserved softness. She deserved admiration untainted by pity or scrutiny. Without planning to, he found himself plucking a white camellia from the garden's wintering bush. Its petals shone like moonlight cupped in his palm. He left it upon her desk, beside her inkwell, and slipped away before Mrs. Whitcomb could question him. The next morning Lillian discovered the bloom. Surprise flickered in her eyes, followed by a warmth that breathed life into her whole expression. She touched the petals gently, reverently. "Aunt Henrietta," she called softly, "did you leave this for me?" Her aunt peered at the flower and shook her head. "No, my dear. Though it is lovely." Lillian looked again at the camellia, and a faint blush rose on her cheeks. "It must have been Mrs. Whitcomb," she murmured, though the notion felt improbable even as she said it. Benedict, polishing the brass sconces nearby, pretended not to listen, though the exchange etched itself deeply into him. She desired kindness, and she wondered who cared enough to offer it. By noon, the house was visited by Lord Percival Ashcombe, arriving unannounced in a flourish of green velvet and self-satisfaction. He stepped into the drawing-room as though doing them a favor by breathing their air. "Miss Marcourt," he said, offering a counterfeit smile, "I have come to inquire after your well-being. Rumor suggests you are under considerable strain." Lady Henrietta stiffened. Lillian remained serene. "I assure you," she replied, "I am quite well." Percival's gaze swept the room and landed on the camellia. He lifted it between two fingers as though it were evidence of crime. "A curious token. From whom, I wonder? One might think it inappropriate, especially given your engagement prospects." Lillian's spine straightened. "It was a kind gesture, my lord. Nothing more." "A kind gesture from whom?" he pressed, his tone sharpening. "A lady must guard her associations, Miss Marcourt, particularly when servants with ambitions roam about." Benedict felt heat rise in his chest. To be spoken of as though he were a stain on the carpet, yet he could not reveal himself. Lillian, however, met Lord Percival's insinuation without flinching. "A flower," she said calmly, "is not a scandal, but the eagerness to suspect impropriety speaks volumes of the suspector." Percival's eyes narrowed. "Words like that may cost you a duke's favor." "If a duke's favor rests upon such fragile ground," Lillian answered, "then perhaps it is not favor worth having." The room fell silent. Percival released the camellia with a scoff. "We shall see how your courage fares when his grace learns of this." He left in a storm of offended pride. Lady Henrietta sank onto the sofa, horrified. "Lillian, my dear, you must be careful. Rumors travel faster than reason." Lillian touched the flower again as though drawing strength from it. "I will not live in fear of gossip. I have endured enough of that." From the corner of the room, Benedict felt admiration twist into something perilous, a longing he had no right to feel. She defended not only herself but the dignity of those beneath society's notice. She valued truth, compassion, character. She had spoken of a duke she had never met with fairness he had not earned. That evening, a letter arrived bearing the Hawthorne seal. The Duchess herself demanded an update on whether the match should proceed, troubled by reports of regrettable impropriety. Benedict held the letter in his hands long after the household slept, the wax cold beneath his thumb. Lord Percival's poison had spread quickly. His disguise had allowed him to see Lillian clearly, but it had also chained him. To defend her now would expose everything. To say nothing risked losing her forever. He set the letter aside and stared toward her darkened window. Tomorrow, he decided, he would seek her heart not as a duke, but as the man she believed him to be. And the consequences, whichever came, would belong to them both. Rain had swept through Brookage Lane with a quiet fury, turning the cobblestones slick and painting the gas lamps in trembling halos of gold. The Marcourt townhouse, already weary under the weight of its fading grandeur, now murmured with restless creaks as wind pressed against the shutters. Inside, the servants busied themselves securing windows and hauling in damp firewood. Mrs. Whitcomb oversaw the bustle with brisk authority, yet even she could not hide the unease lingering in the air, a tension born not of weather, but of rumors winding their way through London with merciless efficiency. Benedict, still wearing the guise of Thomas Gray, stood in the dim corridor leading to the kitchens, shaking rain from his coat. Drops clung to his hair and slid down the curve of his jaw before he brushed them away. He was halfway through rolling up his wet sleeves when he felt her presence. Lillian paused in the archway, a shawl drawn around her shoulders, her face lit softly by the glow of the kitchen hearth. "You are drenched," she said quietly, stepping closer. Her tone held neither command nor pity, only concern, offered as naturally as breath. "I was helping Mrs. Whitcomb secure the garden shutters," he replied, unable to keep his eyes from her. A task that proved more treacherous than anticipated. Her lips curved, though sorrow dimmed the gesture. "London weather does seem intent on testing us." She hesitated before venturing further into the room. Benedict felt the shift immediately. The clatter of dishes faded, the bustle of servants diminished as though the house itself sensed the intimacy of the moment. She settled onto the wooden bench beside the hearth, motioning for him to join her. It was improper, undeniably so, yet her calm acceptance made refusal feel almost discourteous. He sat a respectful distance away. The fire crackled, casting honeyed light upon her features. For the first time she looked weary, not from labor but from enduring the weight of society's scorn. He felt an ache bloom in his chest at the sight. "My aunt is frightened," she murmured, staring into the flames. Every whisper seems to carve another piece from her composure. "I fear she will break under the strain before this arranged meeting with the Duke even occurs." "You appear to bear the strain far better than she," he said. She shook her head gently. "No, I merely hide it better. A woman's dignity often depends on silence, more than truth, more than comfort." She folded her hands together. "One cannot display fear even when one feels it pressing inward like winter frost." He watched her with quiet reverence. "You endure more than most could." "And yet," she replied, offering a faint smile, "you speak as though you know me well." "Perhaps I observe more carefully than most." Her gaze flickered toward him. "That is precisely what unsettles me, Mr. Gray. You seem to notice everything. Yet you reveal so very little of yourself." His breath faltered. She had drawn closer without moving, her curiosity a gentle pull he could neither resist nor escape. Her words echoed the truth he had been avoiding. He lived behind two masks, the Duke in society and the servant before her, and neither felt honest in her presence. "What would you have me reveal?" he asked, voice low. She took a measured breath, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever tire of being overlooked? Or does the certainty of your station, wherever it lies, offer comfort?" The question pierced him. She believed him to be a man of humble birth, yet she sought his feelings without condescension. "I think," he answered slowly, "that being unseen can be both a refuge and a prison." She nodded. "Yes, that is true." Her fingers traced the edge of her shawl. "There are days I wish I could vanish from society's expectations entirely. But I fear that would wound my aunt more than all the gossip ever could. Your loyalty to her is admirable." "She raised me when my parents passed," Lillian said softly. "Everything I have done, every polite smile, every restrained word, has been for her. Even this marriage arrangement, which I do not entirely trust, I consented to because she believes it may restore our standing." "Do you wish to marry the Duke?" Benedict asked, scarcely breathing. Her answer came without hesitation. "I wish to marry a man who listens. A man who speaks truth, not platitudes. A man who sees me even when society does not. If the Duke proves to be such a man, then yes, I would accept him. But I fear he may be like the rest, seeking a wife who will bow rather than be known." Benedict felt each word like a confession meant for him alone. She longed for sincerity, yet he was offering deception. She longed for transparency, yet he approached her under a veil of falsehood. "If a man lacked status," he said quietly, "but offered honesty, would that be enough?" She lifted her eyes, and the firelight caught in them like liquid bronze. "Honesty," she whispered, "is a rarer quality than rank. If a servant asked for my truth, I would give it before I offered it to a duke. A servant sees the world without illusions." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Mr. Gray, what do you truly fear?" The room tightened around him. Her question brushed dangerously close to the truth he hid. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The persona he wore, this humble servant, was cracking under her gaze. Before he could speak, the wind surged, pushing the shutters hard against the wall. The candle nearest them sputtered, then extinguished, plunging the room into intimate shadow. In the flickering darkness, their hands brushed, softly, accidentally, yet with an electricity that stole breath. Lillian froze, her fingers trembling for a single heartbeat before retreating. "Forgive me," she murmured, though her voice held no true regret. "The storm has unsettled everything tonight." He forced a steady whisper. "Not everything." She exhaled, a delicate sound that felt like surrender. But the moment was broken by Mrs. Whitcomb's distant call, summoning him for a task he did not hear clearly over the thunder rolling through the city. Lillian rose, smoothing her skirts, attempting composure while her heart waged its own fervent rebellion. "Good night, Mr. Gray," she said softly. "You are kinder than most." He bowed, unable to speak the truth she deserved. She stepped toward the corridor when footsteps echoed from the front hall. A courier arrived, dripping rain onto the marble floor. He extended a sealed letter to Lady Henrietta, who hurried to read it with shaking hands. Lillian moved to her aunt's side as the seal cracked. A gasp escaped Lady Henrietta's throat. "The Duke, His Grace Benedict Hawthorne, requests to meet you tomorrow morning," she whispered. "At Hawthorne House." Lillian pressed a hand to her chest. "Tomorrow? So soon?" Benedict stood motionless, heart lodged painfully in his throat. She would meet him, as a duke, while still believing him nothing more than a servant with kind eyes and a borrowed name. As Lillian disappeared into the darkened corridor, her shawl trailing behind her like a sigh, he felt the gravity of the choice before him. The truth would shatter everything she knew. Yet he could not turn back. Tomorrow the world would change. For both of them. The grand facade of Hawthorne House loomed against a pale morning sky, its stone pillars rising like sentinels carved from centuries of expectation. Carriages lined the sweeping drive, their wheels settling into the gravel with soft crunches, each visitor drawn by rumors already swirling through London. The Duke had summoned his arranged bride early. Some whispered that he meant to end the agreement. Others claimed a scandal had forced his hand. Whatever the truth, the air outside the estate trembled with anticipation. Lillian stepped from her modest carriage with a composure she did not feel. Her gloves trembled slightly at the wrist, betraying the storm still stirring inside her. Lady Henrietta stood beside her, her expression taut with dread and fragile hope. They ascended the marble steps, and the great doors opened to reveal Mrs. Whitcomb, far grander here than in the Marcourt townhouse, her authority unmistakable. Yet she offered Lillian a look that was almost sympathetic. "His Grace awaits you in the East drawing room," she said quietly. Lillian's pulse echoed in her ears as they crossed the corridors, the walls lined with ancestral portraits that watched her with austere scrutiny. When the drawing room doors parted, her breath caught. For there, standing beneath a vast chandelier, was the man she had confided in by firelight, Thomas Gray, but dressed now in the full regalia of Benedict Hawthorne, Duke of Wessington. His dark coat, embroidered subtly with silver, bore the insignia of his lineage. He stood tall, composed, yet unmistakably altered by the weight of what he was about to unveil. Lady Henrietta gasped softly. Lillian could not breathe. "Miss Marcourt," Benedict said, stepping forward, "I owe you the truth." The word struck like a blow. Her throat tightened as shock gave way to something deeper, betrayal blooming like frost across a window pane. "You," she managed, voice unsteady, "were never a servant." "No," he met her gaze without flinching, though sorrow darkened his eyes. "I came to you in disguise because I feared the arranged nature of our meeting. I wished to know your heart without the influence of my station." Lillian's fingers curled against her skirts. "You wish to judge me." "I wish to understand you," he corrected softly, "and to let you see me, though I hid the title that would have obscured everything." "But you did obscure everything." Her words fell with quiet precision, sharper for their restraint. "You let me speak freely, believing you were a man without power. You let me trust you." He took another step toward her, though she did not retreat. "Every word you spoke became a revelation I did not deserve. You showed me what dignity looked like under hardship. You showed me kindness when I deserved suspicion. And yet," she whispered, "you repaid honesty with deception." Before he could answer, the doors swung open with theatrical force. Lord Percival Ashcombe strode in, his confidence sharpened by opportunity. He cast a sweeping bow, mocking, triumphant. "Your Grace," he declared, "I beg pardon for the intrusion, but given recent gossip, I feared Miss Marcourt might require assistance defending her virtue." "Her virtue needs no defense," Benedict replied coldly. "Does it not?" Percival lifted a brow. "London speaks of clandestine tokens and secret meetings with a servant, your servant as it turns out. One might wonder whether Miss Marcourt sought affection below her station to secure influence above it." Lady Henrietta's breath shuddered. Benedict's jaw tightened. Lillian, however, stepped forward with a poise that silenced the room. "My lord, if society chooses to twist kindness into impropriety, it reflects upon their character, not mine." "Bold words," Percival sneered, "for a lady whose future depends entirely on his Grace's tolerance." "And yours seems dependent on undermining women who refuse your attention," she replied, her voice calm, cutting. A murmur rose among the gathered witnesses outside the threshold, aristocrats who had drifted closer, hungry for spectacle. Benedict saw them and felt the flicker of shame the old title had long taught him to ignore. But Lillian's composure, her refusal to bow to scorn, stoked something inside him, something resolute. "Lord Percival," Benedict said, stepping between him and Lillian, "you will remove yourself from my house. Immediately." "You dismiss me without hearing my counsel?" Percival challenged. "I dismiss you," Benedict replied, "because your counsel is poison masquerading as propriety." Gasps fluttered through the hallway. Percival stiffened, then forced an elegant bow before departing with a glare sharp enough to wound. Silence followed, heavy as velvet. Benedict turned back to Lillian. "I cannot undo the harm my deception has caused. But know this, every moment in your presence changed me. You spoke truth to a man you believed powerless. You offered grace without expectation. You saw humanity where others saw station, and I found myself wishing to be worthy of such sight." Emotion trembled through her, visible only in the faint tightening of her jaw. "I trusted the servant because he asked nothing of me," she said quietly. "I do not know if I can trust the Duke who expects everything." "I expect nothing," he answered, voice raw. "Not your forgiveness, not your affection. Only the chance to prove I can be the man you believed in." For a long moment she said nothing. The fire crackled softly, the chandelier chimed faintly with each shift of the wind. Her gaze wandered to the window, where pale sunlight broke through thinning clouds, the world beyond the glass brightening as if urging her to choose the path ahead. At last she turned back to him. "I cannot decide my heart in the shadow of an audience." The onlookers dispersed, startled by her firm, dignified command. Even Lady Henrietta withdrew, leaving only the two of them in the broad, quiet room. Lillian stepped closer, not in surrender but in strength. "Your deception wounded me. But I cannot deny the sincerity I saw in the man by the hearth." Her breath wavered. "I will decide whether those two men are one and the same." He bowed his head, humbled. "Whatever you choose, I will honor it." She nodded once, a gesture of both restraint and promise, then turned toward the door. Each step echoed with the weight of uncertainty, yet not despair. The tension between them, fractured, yearning, unresolved, hung like a question awaiting breath. At the threshold she paused but did not look back. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "you shall have my answer." And with that, she left him standing beneath the chandelier's fractured light, grateful for the hope she had not withheld, and terrified of the truth she would soon speak. Evening settled over London with the hush of a city exhaling after a day of fervent whispers. Fog curled along the Thames like pale ribbons, and gas lamps flickered against the rising chill. In Hawthorne House, Benedict paced the length of his study, each step echoing the turmoil lodged within him. Lillian's parting words, "Tomorrow you shall have my answer," had lodged themselves deeper than any blade. For the first time in his life, a duke who commanded estates, councils, and entire households stood powerless before one woman's quiet judgment. He had written and rewritten a letter of apology, but every sentence felt insufficient. He tore the final draft in two and cast it into the hearth. Words penned would never match words spoken with a bare and honest heart. Yet he feared the morning more than any battlefield of politics. If she chose to sever the arrangement, he would have no right to protest. He had deceived her, wounded her trust, and shaken the fragile ground upon which her dignity stood. As night deepened, he moved to the window overlooking the gardens. Lanterns swayed in the breeze, raindrops clung to the panes like unfallen tears. He pressed his palm against the glass as though he could will her closeness through it. He had disguised himself to learn her truth, yet the truth he discovered was his own. Without her, his title was hollow, his estate a gilded cage, his life a quiet performance of inherited duties. She had shown him a world in which kindness could be strength, and honesty the rarest treasure. When dawn finally touched the rooftops, Benedict had not slept. He dressed without ceremony, eschewing the heavy brocade and jeweled insignia expected of a duke. He chose instead a simpler coat, dark and unadorned. If she rejected him, it would not be the duke she turned away, it would be the man. Before he could summon a carriage, Mrs. Whitcomb appeared at the door, breathless. "Your Grace," the Marcourt carriage departed at first light. Departed? His pulse jolt. For where? A driver said Miss Marcourt wished to be taken anywhere quiet enough to think. They headed toward Lambeth Bridge. He was out the door before she finished speaking. The ride was a blur, galloping hooves, splattering mud, the city unfolding in swift motion. The morning sky hovered between gray and gold, poised between rain and a reluctant dawn. As he approached the bridge, he saw her. Lillian stood alone at its center, shawl fluttering in the breeze, gloved hands folded against the cold stone railing. Her figure was framed by the slow sweep of the Thames, the current moving beneath her like time itself, steady, unhurried, unforgiving. He slowed his horse and dismounted, breath sharp in his throat. She did not turn as he approached. She had recognized the rhythm of his steps long before he reached her side. "You came quickly," she murmured, eyes remaining on the water. "I would have flown if I had wings." A faint tremor crossed her lips, but she remained composed. Silence stretched between them, taut, fragile, humming with all they had left unsaid. "You deceived me," she began softly, "and yet, I cannot deny that the man you were, the man by the hearth, was honest in ways the Duke could not be." He bowed his head. "I came to you in disguise because I feared what my title would force from you. I wanted to meet you without the constraints of lineage or obligation. But in doing so, I became the very thing I despised, another man who denied you truth." Lillian turned to face him fully. Her eyes reflected both hurt and a quiet strength he admired with aching clarity. "What I feared most," she whispered, "was that the kindness I saw in you was a performance. That the servant who listened with sincerity would vanish the moment the Duke stood before me." "Then let me tell you the truth," he said, stepping nearer. "The servant was the man I wished to be. The Duke was the mask I inherited. You saw me, Benedict, not the title. And I am more myself with you than I have ever been." Her breath caught, but she did not retreat. "And if I accept you," she asked softly, "whom do I marry? The servant or the Duke?" "You marry neither," he answered. "You marry the man who has shed them both." A fragile silence followed. The sun edged through the cloud cover, casting soft radiance over the river. It gilded the strands of her hair, warmed the stone beneath their feet, and illuminated the tears she fought to contain. "Do not kneel," she murmured, noticing the tremor in his posture. "I must." His voice roughened as he sank gently, not in proposal but in repentance. The cold stone bit through his trousers, yet he did not flinch. "I kneel because I wronged you," he said, "and because the first truth I give you freely is that I love you, not as a duke seeks a wife, but as a man seeks the keeper of his heart." Her breath trembled, the words brushing against wounds still tender. "You love me," she repeated, barely above a whisper. "I do. Entirely. Irrevocably. Whether you walk away or walk toward me, that will not change." For a moment she stood perfectly still, the world holding its breath around her. Then slowly she reached out and touched his cheek, gentle, steady, warm. "Rise, Benedict Hawthorne," she said, voice soft but resolute. "Rise not as a duke nor as a servant, but as the man who has finally chosen truth." He rose, breath unsteady, hope dawning sharp and bright in his chest. She stepped closer, the distance between them dissolving like mist. "I was hurt," she whispered, "but I was also seen. And that is something I cannot cast aside." Her hand rested lightly over his heart. "Let us begin again with honesty as our foundation." Emotion surged within him. Relief, reverence, the fierce tenderness of a man granted a second chance. He covered her hand with his own. "Then let us begin." They turned toward the waiting carriage, walking side by side beneath the softening sky. The river flowed on, bearing away the remnants of falsehood, leaving only truth in its wake. As they crossed the bridge, a thought lingered between them. That love, once stripped of disguise, was stronger than any title, and braver than the world that tried to define it.